was going to ask about Saint Dymphna, if you know much about her.
Oh, okay. Well, she's a very interesting saint. So she came from Ireland, Saint Dymphna. First of all, she is the patroness of the mentally ill. She is a patron saint for mental illness. And her life is very interesting. So I don't remember all the details, but her father, if I remember rightly, was an Irish chieftain. She was going to be forced to wed or to engage in relations that she did not want to engage in. So she fled. She assumed a disguise and traveled across. Got in a boat, got across the channel, wound up in, I think, Belgium somewhere near Gale. That's Belgium, modern day Belgium. So, and she was just trying to hide out, but she was tracked down. You know, in those days, you sort of asked at the port, like, do you see anybody that looks like this? Or do you notice anything like this? And she was somehow tracked down, and her father was furious. And if I recall, it was her father himself who killed her because she would not agree to his demands. And if I remember right, he wanted to take her as his concubine, and basically it was not lawful. In any case, she stood firm for her virginal purity, and for this she was killed. And then after her death, many miracles just started to stream from her relics, including the healing of many people with mental illness, and that's how she got to be the patroness of mental illness.
Where are they?
I'm not entirely sure, but I think they're in Belgium. And they may be in other places as well. So... and I don't remember her feast day even. She's never on the Western calendar. She was not usually on the Western calendars of saints like as a high-ranking feast. So I just don't recall. Anyway, that's all I know. And I know many Orthodox people who pray to her a lot. Yes.
Are there any saints who are actually mentally ill?
This is a very good question, because usually mental illness is a condition of fallen human nature that is very much tied in with various passions and sins and even demonic influences. Many people used to think it's just a demonic affliction. And modern science would say, oh no, it's all an imbalance of chemicals and hormones and things like that. It can have both elements. And so it's a complicated question. But St. John of Kronstadt would visit a sanatorium for the mentally ill, and a mental asylum, an insane asylum. And he would talk to people that no one else was able to get through to. And there was a particular lady, she would shout out obscenities and blasphemies. She would just shout them out. Now we call this Tourette syndrome, but they didn't know what that was back then. And he would bring her Holy Communion, and he was asked, now, Father John, you know she shouts out blasphemies. How can she then ever be worthy to receive the holy mysteries? And he says, yes, but it doesn't touch her soul. That means that there can be symptoms of mental illness that are not simply manifestations of sinful choices in the person's own life, nor are demonic, or at least capable of being treated with Holy Communion. And so she would make her preparation as best she could, and then he would bring her Holy Communion, no matter what people said about it. And that's before these things were really understood in the light of, Freudian and psychoanalysis and stuff. So now to go back to the question of whether saints can have mental illness. If you read a lot of saints' lives, you see what we would now identify, what a modern psychiatrist would identify as clear signs of mental illness. especially Great Depression, crippling depression. Because clinical depression is not when you're just sad about something, it's when like you can't even get out of bed because you're so ill. And we see this in certain lives of certain saints. And then there are these saints that feigned mental illness, like the Fools for Christ, we have so many of in the Russian church. But I don't know, some of them might be both mentally ill and holy. I mean, I could think of Blessed Pasha of DVO, Pelagia. Some of these, were spiritual daughters in the tradition of Saint Seraphim of Sarov. And yet they're held in great honor by the Orthodox people. So I think it is possible that you could have afflictions of mental illness and reach sanctity. But probably the more sanctity you reach, probably the less those things might impair you in general, because the same thing is true of other sorts of shortcomings and faults, and it's not what we call mental illness. Basically the holiness of being closer to God should help with physical illness. But then some afflictions are actually that God may be glorified. That could be mental as well as physical. But I do know someone very dear who has suffered terribly with mental illness in her life, and after many years of struggling and making great progress with the help, by the way, of psychoactive medications, which are a complicated topic because they can also cause so much physical harm and damage, and yet sometimes like it's the lesser of all the evils. So I don't know, I can't really speak to that. But anyway, this person told me after all these years of struggling and making great progress, and her probation officer had said the best progress of any person that's ever been on his caseload, because she had humility to confess her shortcomings and to not try to uphold her pride and stand up for herself, and just said, no, I'm just all screwed up. And I need Christ's help, and I need the Orthodox Church, and I need the sacraments. And with this humble approach, she made great progress over some decades. And then she told me, Father Aidan, I used to ask God, why he let this happen to me. It was something very dear and close to me. And, but now I understand it's so that because I was too prideful, I would have been very prideful and very judgmental of people. But now all this has happened to me. So now I don't think I'm better than other people. So she saw the hand of God in permitting this because it humbled her. So it's similar to questions of if indeed it's caused by imbalances and chemical imbalances and so forth. Well, then it's very similar to it's a subset of physical suffering, and many of the saints have suffered terribly physically, even though there's nothing wrong with their souls. They were holy and pure before God. It wasn't because they were actively engaged in sin. So the same thing can be true for mental illness.
What about, where do the holy fools fit into this conversation?
Well, for one thing, most of them deliberately showed signs of mental illness to others for the same reason that this woman was speaking to me about. So that people would not praise them, so that they would not say, oh, what a holy man, oh, he's so good, oh, he's so holy. Oh, they're like, get lost, freak. And so by having no hope of praise from men, they could keep their humility. I mean, the spiritual gifts and being able to work miracles and being able to know the future and being able to know what's happening in other people's hearts, well, I mean, that could sort of make you pretty have a pretty high opinion of yourself. So they guarded against falling into pride by just abasing themselves before everybody and dishonoring themselves before everybody. There was the abbess who, they found the abbess of the convent playing in the pig pen in the mud and just wallowing in the mud, and they were horrified. Russian, with the great tradition of Fools for Christ. Why are you? She says, everybody else has to obey me, but I don't have anyone to obey. I don't have anyone to rebuke me or to correct me or to scold me or to, not give me a blessing to do something. So she says, so I have to do it this way. I have to get humbled this way. So, the human soul, longs for the safety of being in a humble frame of mind. It's dangerous to be prideful, and it separates you from God. So a truly Christian soul, that we were just reading about this in the letter of divine ascent during Lent, a truly Christian soul doesn't want to be respected by everybody. That's a heavy burden. And seeks opportunities to be, disrespected. So, and we're just always trying to have everybody like us and respect us and look up to us and not offend us and say good things about us behind our backs and never say anything bad behind our backs. But a real Christian heart, well, we just have other goals in mind. Does that?
It's beautiful.
Okay. So, the letter of divine ascent talks about people that would seek opportunities to, get taken down a notch. I mean, even sometimes saints would just, they would be falsely accused. Okay, so you have a saint who, who is a woman who, for various reasons, has entered a men's monastery pretending to be male, and then is accused of impregnating a woman in the village. Well, but they don't say, hold on a second. I can prove my innocence. But whether for the original reasons that they undertook this kind of a unusual lifestyle to be maintained, or whether because they want to remain totally humble. Male saints have done the same thing, though. So St. Brixius of Tours, he was the disciple of St. Martin of Tours. He became bishop after St. Martin. So this is, 4th century going into the early 5th century and that kind of time frame. And he was accused, and he had always been pure as a monk his whole life, working as a disciple of St. Martin in the monastery. But he was accused of impregnating a lady. And even when the village all gathered together to accuse him and make him prove his innocence, the child was too young to talk, and he still said, in the name of Christ, tell the people, who is your father? And he gives some other guy's name. I mean, this is a child that should not be able to even speak. It was a miracle. Yeah, but they had their knives out. They still, they still went after him and drove him out of his see and accused him, and he had to go appeal his case to Rome, which we were just talking about in another context. He appealed his case to Rome. It took like 7 years or longer, maybe 13 years. And finally got his case resolved, finally proved his innocence, finally was restored to his see, but a much humbler man than he had been before, because he had been full of pride. And St. Martin warned him about this. In fact, foretold it was going to happen. But he says, but finally you're going to learn humility. And all that taught him humility.
Like Nebuchadnezzar.
So, yeah. So sometimes Christians seek out the hard things of life. Are worried about living with and working with somebody who just really doesn't like you and just, accuses you all the time and just says bad things to you. Some Christians search out those opportunities because they can practice virtues on a heroic level, not just an ordinary everyday level. So this is wisdom.
Could you talk about, you used the phrase heroic level in the sense of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Is that of a basis within the Christian tradition, heroic Christianity, or is that just a better way of describing it?
Well, in the gospel we are exhorted to more than ordinary virtues. For example, it says in the gospel, if you love those who love you, what is it in the King James? What thank have ye? But in modern English, this would be, what, is that all? Is that it?
Even Gentiles do as such.
Because Christians are called to love those who hate them, to bear patiently with those who are, haranguing them and making their life difficult, and to pray for them and love them just as much as everybody else. So yes, that is heroic. That is above and beyond the call of what most people think of as duty. And if we have to have a choice between death and denying Christ, we have to be martyrs. You shouldn't freak out too much about that, thinking, I'm too scared. Because God helps you. If there's something special you have to do, God gives you special grace to be able to do it. It's true with anything. It's the same thing with the priesthood. So, okay, maybe you can't do all this stuff, but God's going to give you some help from above. It's the same thing with martyrdom, but martyrdom is a heroic act. We were just talking about another example of heroic virtue. So, St. Gregory the Dialogist, before he was Bishop of Rome, Pope, he was abbot of the monastery of St. Andrew on the Celian Hill in Rome. So, as abbot, one time this happened to him. A man comes to the gates of the monastery, all bedraggled looking. He says, I want to speak to the abbot. So, okay. So he says that I'm a sailor. Our ship sank. There was shipwreck. Barely made it to land. Lost everything. I'm in a foreign country. I have no means to sustain myself. Can you please give me some money? So, yes, he goes out of the treasury of the monastery. He gives him money. An hour later, he comes back. I lost it. I can't believe this. I just can't believe this happened to me. I just lost all the money. Now I'm still in the same predicament. I don't have anything. Can you please help me? He commanded that money be given from the treasury of the monastery. Okay. So this would be about the year 595 or something like that. And, or 590. Anyway, so he goes off, thank you so much. Again, he's very grateful. Again, he leaves. Well, a couple hours later, he's back again. Oh, I lost it all again. Can you please? Now, at this point, what would any of us do? Okay, dude, there is a limit. St. Gregory prays. He says, bring something from the treasury. Oh, sorry, there's nothing left in the treasury. So then he tells, I'm so sorry, there's nothing. But then he thinks, oh, wait a second. My aunt's silver tray is of great value. It's an heirloom. It's sitting over in the sunset. She says, bring that silver tray. It can be melted down or exchanged or something. And they bring it, and he gives him the silver tray. At which point, the sailor reveals that he is the archangel Raphael, who has been sent by God to test St. Gregory's humility, his love for his fellow man, and his patience. And the angel departed from him. So this was a heroic virtue. And there's many, just read the lives of saints, they're doing heroic things all the time. But it's not just for them, let's realize what a high calling, we have.
I thought the guy was robbing him.
Hmm?
I thought the sailor was robbing him.
Yeah, anybody would. And who knows, maybe if somebody else that was robbing him came by, he would say, no, get lost. But, no. I mean, he did set limits on charity in other ways, because he, every day, he had a rule that 12 poor men from Rome were to be invited into the monastery. He would wash their feet personally, and they would eat at the abbot's table the best food that the monastery had, but only 12. We know this because one day they invited the men in. They were sitting at the table, they were eating, and St. Gregory, wait a second, 13 guests. So this is disobedience. So he takes the monk who's in charge of gathering them in, bringing them in. He takes him to a side room so as not to embarrass him. And he says, okay, look, I told you 12, not 13. Why 13? I only invited 12. He says, no, there were 13. You can count them. He goes back and counts them. No, I only count 12. Right. No, I count 13. No, I only count 12. He says, okay, something's up. So as they're finishing their meal, he's looking around at the faces of all these guests, these poor men. He noticed the face of one of them is unusual, like from different angles, it sort of looks different. Seems to change a little bit. He says, something's up there, over there. So all the poor men are leaving, and then he says, I want you to stay behind. And he takes him into a side room, and he says, I beg you in the name of God to tell me who you are. And then he revealed, I am the angel of the Lord, who am sent by God to witness to your love for your fellow man. And the angel departed from him. So on that occasion, but notice he had a limit to his charity because it was only 12. He's not going to feed everybody every day. Probably couldn't, on a sustained basis. So it was only 12. So can there be limits to our charitable giving? Perhaps.